Welcome to Inside Shopify UX. I'm your host, Lola Oyelayo-Pearson, UX Director at Shopify. On today's episode, I chat with UX Director Gavin Harvey and UX Manager Owen Williams about designing developer experiences. We'll discuss how we
optimize the crap out of everything,
chat about UX creep, and wax poetic about feedback. Stay tuned. Owen, Gavin, thank you so much for coming on the Inside Shopify UX podcast. I'm very excited about this conversation, which in my mind is permission to nerd out. So we are embracing all geek energy, all full nerddom as much as we can as designers who are actually always cool anyway, right? But I'd love to just dig into a little bit of the work you do, the philosophies you have, and tell the world about designing developer experiences at Shopify. So to maybe kick things off, please tell the audience who you are and what team you're part of and the types of things that you're working off. I'll start with you, Gavin.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this. I'm Gavin Harvey, and I am the UX director for the build team at Shopify. And that team is responsible for the application development platform. So our team's really involved in empowering developers to create better experiences for merchants, mainly that merchants use to kind of, I would say, upgrade or level up their commerce operation.
And what types of things has Build put out there that we would see?
Right. So that would include a lot of the things that as a developer, you would be using day to day to build, preview, test, and deploy apps on our platform. That includes things like the command line interface, all of the sort of APIs and data models that developers rely on, our dev documentation site, right, at Shopify.dev. That's something that the team works on. Our team's also in charge of Shopify's design system, which is called Polaris. So that includes a lot of the kind of front end components and building blocks of the UI. So things like that. That's kind of like the whole picture. We have a lot of powerful technology under the hood that the team works on, and it's very interesting from a UX perspective because a lot of that stuff is not the kind of thing that you would necessarily see, with your eye, right? It's services, right? It's how we think about performance and privacy and a lot of the underlying structure of Shopify's applications. So yeah, that's the stuff that my team is currently focused on.
Okay, we're going to dig all the way into that because I'm going to have a whole conversation around dev docs as well in a second. But Owen, please tell everyone who you are.
Hey, I'm Owen Williams. I'm a UX manager on a team we're calling Custom Storefronts now. Many names in the past. You might have heard Headless, I think is the one that we try to avoid saying. But we're the team that's responsible for sort of like the big bet on the future of sort of what we, as I said, call custom storefronts at Shopify. So the two pieces that people might have run into so far, there's a framework that we've released with a crazy website called Hydrogen. If you go to hydrogen.shopify.dev, we have a very funky gradient website. It's bananas. And that's it's so good. It came out so good.
I mean,
it is right in the wave of that.
A geek's dream. Both Hydrogen and Dev Docs, when we released them this year, it's that's why I titled the episode Permission to Nerd Out.
Yeah.
It's probably the first time in ages I've seen such nerdery being welcomed in a corporate site.
I don't want to go off script already, but the fact that we got it approved just makes me so happy because it's so it's very loud. If you haven't seen it and you've made it this far, just go there and look at it. So
we've got to stick it in front of everyone because it's the first landing spot. I'm oh my God.
Yeah.
And it's brand new too. So we have that. And then the second piece of that is sort of a hosting counterpart to that called Oxygen, which we'll be releasing in, I think I can say 2022. I think the website says 2022, which actually is a sort of hosted, optimized platform for Hydrogen apps. So it's a really opinionated way to get them running fast, keep it close to the data. We sort of optimize the crap out of everything you would have to like do manually on any competing platforms. And it's sort of like 2 clicks and boom, you're done. And so that's really exciting. We're the team that looks after that. We have a few other things that are related, like domains as well, which is a fun one. But we're sort of thinking of like, what does the future of storefronts look like, especially for merchants that are growing or getting really big. They're looking for something custom, something they can control, add some crazy gradients or whatever. And so we want to give them the best start they can have, as opposed to figuring out, like sort of looking and grabbing. The way it had worked in the past is you would go to all these other platforms and you would like piece it together and figure it out yourself. And we're sort of like, here's the thing, just go and build it. Like, don't spend 6 months trying to make it work. So we're sort of at square one. We're hoping to get some feedback soon. And the funny thing actually is I also worked in core build, so I can nerd out on that too. I worked on that before.
Well, so then let's start with the basics here, because both dev docs and, Gavin, you were talking about designing APIs and looking after all of that stuff. So to work in your teams, does a designer have to be able to code?
No. Sorry, I'm just like straight out the gate.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about that, because I think that's been like the eternal debate of like, do you have to code? Do you not have to code? And certainly, like, if we listen to Toby, he's certainly of the opinion that the whole world is going to learn how to code. To be honest, my 4-year-old is learning how to code and she's already doing a great job at that. So like, maybe that is the reality, right? We should all just accept we're all going to code somehow, and that's a part of our future, right?
I've got a really hot take on this. I think I generally agree that it's useful to, I would say you don't need to code, you just need to have like this an endless curiosity about it. Like, you don't have to like go and figure out how React works.
Yeah.
All I ask of the designers on my team is like, try it. Or like do one course, like have a play with it so you understand the fundamentals, and be willing to dig to like answer questions about like stuff in there. Something I've been talking about a lot over the last week is a thing called environment variables. And like in the abstract, it's really hard to talk about. So we're like, hey, let's unpick this with some developers. Let's like talk through it. I don't need you to necessarily go and implement that, but I do ask that like designers coming in have a like baseline curiosity. I think like, hey, go and try Netlify, do like their starter thing, go and try Vercel, try all of these things, do a course. But you don't have to like be the number one developer of a Rails app. Like, I don't expect that.
So you're not
that's my take.
Yeah, Gavin, what's your view?
Yeah, so I think it's important that we, talk about like what it is that designers actually do versus, the products that we work on. So to Owen's point, we don't want to turn all of our designers into CS majors, right? And designers have a whole variety of tools that they use to do their jobs, right? The job of the designer is to weave together a lot of different inputs around, the technical constraints, the customer needs, right? And a whole host of other things like Shopify's brand, for instance, to solve really hard problems in very simple ways. And there's a variety of different methods for doing that. For some designers, coding is a method that they use to solve problems. And we have designers on our team that their preferred medium of creativity is code, which is great, right? But it just so happens that our team is working on a developer platform, right? So just as you would expect a designer working on, let's just say, a fintech app to understand some of the basics of finance and, kind of like banking and that kind of commerce, you would expect a designer who comes and works on a developer platform to either arrive with or be, like Owen said, highly curious about developers as their customer, right? So while we don't expect designers to code for a living or to make that part of their daily practice, as Owen was saying, we would expect that they've explored other developer platforms such as Netlify or Vercel or Twilio or, GCP or any of those other kind of like, big platforms out there that developers use to create apps, right? And to distribute apps, because that's what our customers do. So we definitely want that, because as any designer knows, if you don't have empathy for your customer, it makes it really tough to do your job.
What's really interesting is I also find like the people who come into the team not knowing too much about it, but being really interested in it, like have that fresh eyes superpower thing, because I'm going way deep here on like a rabbit hole, but one thing I've noticed,
rabbit hole, Owen.
I've worked on developer tools, really, really specific ones for the last 6 months. So we did a GitHub integration at Unite for the online store. And it was really hard to work on because all the developers and people who were really close to it had these like weird preconceived notions of how things worked in their head. But then we'd be like, go and click through the GitHub flow. It doesn't work like that. And so having someone come in and not actually have, like all this like muscle memory has actually been a useful thing as well for challenging the developers, because they can, I don't know, I love the like first 6 months of a new job because you can just like act dumb and apologize for the whole, like you can just be like, oh, I'm new.
I mean, I pretty much after 6 months too. So,
Yeah. I
Totally.
do that. But so maybe unpopular opinion, but I have this concept in my mind that designing for developers is kind of like designing for kids. On the one hand, you have a group of people who are like super opinionated and picky and like really like have tantrums if you get it a little bit wrong.
Yeah.
Then on the flip side, you can actually have a lot of fun because you don't have to design for the lowest common denominator. So like, would you say that that's what it's like designing for developers, is that you do get a lot more room, but you also get a very, very, you get all the feedbacks and people.
I want to hear what Gavin says before I try it. Like I really want to react because I just worked on this shiny thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having an audience that's passionate and opinionated is a good thing, right? You want people, because they're going to be motivated to give you feedback, even if that feedback isn't always pleasant. I think that we look at it like feedback is a gift, so that's a good thing. But what they're opinionated about can often be surprising for designers. So, for instance, when it comes to the UI, a lot of our developers, they're, like single developers trying to make a living as a freelancer, working as like a small shop of like 2 or 3 people. They don't necessarily have the means to employ a designer right now, and they're just kind of getting off the ground. So for them, they'll say things like, Polaris is our designer. Like, tell us what the UI should be. They're not opinionated about that. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times they aren't. What they are opinionated about are what we would call like the ergonomics of development, right? The command line interface and the way that you type in commands and essentially like the model of what an application is, right? They're gonna be very opinionated about that. And in Owen's case, I'm guessing that when it comes to storefront, things like JavaScript conventions are going to be something people come to the table with a strong opinion about. So yeah, like opinionated customers are great. But it just so happens that what they're opinionated about would surprise you sometimes working within this domain.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation, because I would generally agree with that. With the caveat that like it's interesting because sometimes I think the kids comment really made me think. I'm like, a lot of the time you put something out there and they react really strongly. I think that's where I think of the kids thing is like developers are like, oh my God, like this is making me do something different. But eventually, like if it's done well, you can like they'll come around to it, which is really interesting. And we're sort of towing the line, especially when you're working on something really new. So for example, with Hydrogen, we're working on something it's called React Server Components. It's not out technically yet. And it's hard for them to understand it. They don't like, at least some of the stuff I see on Twitter that's not related to Hydrogen, but just about the technology is like, why would I need this? Blah, blah, blah. Like all of those sort of takes. But it's like, you really have to show them the power. I think we do that a lot with the dev docs now with the interactive stuff. But that is why when we get to Oxygen, I think it's really important to be like, hey, here it is. It's set up. You can just start playing with it. You can just go to hydrogen.new in your web browser and it just like spins up this dev environment ready to go without doing anything on your computer. And that was a really intentional strategy to be like, hey, there's this new thing, please try it. Like don't just like, oh, it's something hard. And so I think there is a little bit of like I'm gonna mess up the metaphor, but it's like teach them to bring them to the water and teach them to drink. I don't know.
Yeah. No,
but yeah,
kind of like, yeah, it's I'm gonna keep likening it to kids, but it's like trying to get my child to eat a fruit.
Yes.
Like, my current challenge, I'm trying to get her to eat melons, but she sees them as green and therefore they are a vegetable and therefore they cannot be tasty. And I'm like, come on, just give it a try. You gotta, it's a little bit. And then the other day she finally tasted it and lo and behold, the world changed.
Exactly. And I think the ergonomics thing is the key here. So like Gavin was saying about ergonomics, it's like this, I think there's the table stakes stuff that developers are really picky on. And they're like, if you won't do X, Y, and Z, like I don't want to know about it. And so for us, it's things like the CLI. Maybe it's like
CLI being
the command line interface tool that we have, the Shopify CLI. So you can like use that to set up your store or like populate it with products or create your app on your machine. Table stakes, every platform has this. And it's the same with like the creating an app or OAuth, all of that stuff. They want that out of the box. And then it's like, okay, you've met the bar. Now you can show me some crazy stuff, which is interesting.
Can I also just extend this kid metaphor for a second?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's take it all the way.
I've got two little ones of my own. I liken it to this: like building things should be fun. It should be playful, right? There should be satisfaction in creating something and then seeing it kind of like come to life, right? So for developers, I think what they want is to really focus on, writing code, trying things, seeing kind of what happens, right? Hitting that kind of preview button and like getting a sense that, okay, this thing's like kind of like coming to life. What they don't want to deal with, to use the kid part of it, is like cleaning the room and all of like the sort of chores that have to be done, right? They, just like anybody, like they want to play, they want to experiment, they want to create. So we'll get into this maybe a little bit later in this episode, but for a lot of developers, there's a distinction between like the writing of code and creating the project or the application, and what we would call DevOps, which are things like hosting, provisioning a server or a virtual machine, spinning up a database, like all of that stuff. And so what we're seeing a lot now are companies saying, look, you don't want to deal with all that stuff. We will make that as painless as possible for you. And that's a trend, not just here at Shopify, but in the industry overall, is this idea of infrastructure as a service, where you say like, okay, I just want to focus on building my app. I don't want to deal with all this other stuff, right? And companies like, and including Shopify, by the way, are coming to that customer base and saying, cool, we will take care of all that for you. Just focus on creating stuff. So I think that's the way I look at it, is like, just get them to the point of play and fun and experimentation as quickly as possible, and take all of the chores and all of the like housekeeping stuff sort of out of the picture as much as we possibly can.
So let's get into how we do that, because I think that's a really great segue. Because I guess the interesting thing about designing developer experiences as well is like, you're not designing, I mean, we've talked about Hydrogen, Site, and DevDocs, like they're destination experiences.
Yeah.
But the bulk of what you're designing is not a singular UI, right? It's not a destination. It's not like a single place. So how do you deconstruct what to make? And like, how do you even like, are there interesting ways that you approach it from a design lens? It's like, okay, we're going to figure out how to make this DevOps task super easy. What does that look like? Is it just workflows? Are you sketching journeys, or are you actually thinking about like command line, commands and playing with like keyboard elements? Like how do you actually deconstruct the thing that you work on?
I might leave that to you, Gavin. I feel like you're closest to this.
Okay, sure. So yeah, it's definitely a different kind of design challenge, which I think is cool and exciting. Now we do have plenty of experiences where what you're gonna, go to a website, you're gonna see something on a screen, whether it's like the DevDocs side or like the application dashboard, for instance, right? Like, you're kind of like expectations are conventionally to see UI and click on buttons, stuff like that. But as you were indicating there, Lola, it's like there's a lot of stuff we designed that isn't really visible, at least not initially. And so for those kinds of things, we're relying on design methods like, domain modeling, for instance, right? Or creating journey maps, and identifying what are the steps in this workflow and what are the tools that people use. And a lot of times those tools are not Shopify tools, right? So we're trying to meet people where they are and acknowledge the fact that they're going to be doing some tasks off of our platform. What's the end state of that? Where are they trying to get to? In other cases, we're doing a lot of work around things like content design. What are the verbs and the nouns of our platform, right? When we talk about like, okay, I want to create an app. Well, like what exactly do you type in to the command line, and like what order of like words do you put into that command? So a lot of it is pretty cerebral, in the sense that like what we're doing is thinking about like structures of things, like models, task flows, and that kind of stuff from a designer's point of view. But I think that's really interesting, because I feel like at that point we're really working at like the very heart of the system. right? We're really kind of like under the hood and kind of like messing around with the nuts and bolts of things. And there's a lot of power there. So I think it's exciting if that's the kind of design lens that you like to apply to your work, is thinking it like almost taxonomically about experience. Some people might call that, like service design or something like that. You know what I
I
mean?
was going to say the same thing. It's kind of
Yeah.
this behind the scenes design, but you're still very intentional in enabling a lot of things to be possible.
Right.
Just knowing that people are using different tools and interfaces for it.
The one difference I think that makes perhaps hydrogen and oxygen weird is we're very much optimizing for like, how can we get out of the way and let the developer try the thing as fast as possible without all like that sort of business shit. Is this the first swear I just
Oh, yeah,
it's
yes.
all of the business stuff. It's like all of the instincts.
I'm glad you went first because I'm
Yeah.
going to be doing this whole season. It's going to be trash, but hey,
Perfect.
yeah.
Okay, well, so going back to the business shit, like it's the opposite of the instinct of I think a company, especially of our size, would
Yes.
be like, hey, get them in the funnel, like sign
Yeah.
up for the thing,
Yeah.
then you can download it, then you can like create an app. With hydrogen in particular, our strategy is like, how can I get it on my machine as soon as possible without making a Shopify account? Because I think in hydrogen's case, like that's a fail. if they have to like sign up for Shopify, that's a pretty big lift.
Okay.
I'm gonna get controversial here. Sorry, Gavin.
Yeah.
I think another one that we really wanted to like avoid was like, you shouldn't have to know what the partner program is to like do the thing. Like if you're in your head, and this is what Gavin was talking about, when it comes to hydrogen, it's like, you know what the result is that you want. We shouldn't make you care about all these concepts. That will come with time.
Yeah.
And we introduce them as you go through the sort of like ecosystem, and there'll be more when oxygen lands. So it's like sort of the reverse of what a business would usually try and do, which is like, put you in the funnel. You've got the emails, you've got all that crap. And we're like, hey, no, you can just copy this or click this like hydrogen.new thing and you're going. Like, and so it was interesting. We kept getting feedback that was really hard when we were working on this. That was like, there's too many steps. Don't make it wizardy, blah, 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 all of this feedback. And we're like, well, we have to do, like, there's certain things they have to do. And we've gotten to the point where it's really fast. And I think it feels really good, but it's the antithesis of what I was used to, which is like, cool, you're in the partner program. And I can say this because
Sign up for something fast. Yeah, make sure. It's really funny because I like my taste of designing developer experiences was I spent a brief period in a blockchain startup.
Right.
And like our first product was essentially like a sandbox. What we needed to happen is we needed developers to come and try and code in Go and try and use blockchain to do a thing. And like the halo was write your first smart contract.
Right.
And I'll be honest, like I was quite advanced in my design career and freaked the fuck out pretty much most of the time because there was no UI for me. Like there was just there was this huge learning curve of, all the different tools that developers used to write code and the different languages and frameworks. And we had this cool idea about creating like one language that you could use across a bunch of different blockchains and stuff. Kind of didn't really happen, but it was super fun in lots of ways. And I guess one of the things that I identified was like I had to design very differently. I had to approach my work as a designer with a very different hand. So I'm interested if there are unique rituals or processes that you've had to cultivate to help your teams get into the headspace of designing for developers. So things that you wouldn't necessarily do if what you were designing was like, a website for something else, some other random, consumer tool, for example.
The one that comes to mind for us has been, we do this thing where like, I mean, when we were working on the very crazy hydrogen part where we're like trying to get towards release, was actually we would just sit as a group, sometimes with the developers, sometimes not, and run through the flow. Like just do it. Like do it on your machine. Whoever doesn't have it, like make them do it and see if they could get it to go. Which was really helpful because it identified stuff that we were often making people make choices for no reason, for example, or they would get really stuck. So we would go back and re-explain something. And when the developers were there, it was a really good gut check. Like, I think I wish we had done this more because there were a few things we didn't catch, but it would be like, we got feedback at one point that there was sort of what was called UX creep on a page because the page told you to go in the code and remove
UX
something.
Creep?
Yeah.
I feel so much affected.
I know. I'm like, oh. So there was this in the hydrogen starter, there was a component that told you to go and do something in the code. Well, like that's kind of like an anti-pattern, because truthfully, you could put a comment in the code that says remove this, and like it's sort of done. And I think it's just like catching those kinds of things we've been sort of trying all sorts of different ways to do that. We're still working on it, but even just, I feel like you can cheat a little bit because you can use your developers internally. We can even ask some random developer at a channel that hasn't used it, be like, hey, can you try this? Doesn't make sense. But another one we're really betting on this year is we actually have like very open community channels, much more than we did in the past. So we have a Discord now. Feels very hip and cool, where developers can actually directly give us feedback on what their experience is like using Hydrogen.
Nice.
So like, do you have an issue with that? And even like Toby is in there, the director of Headless, and like it's pretty crazy because we're really sort of right next to them while they're playing with this, and we're seeing where they're getting stuck pretty quickly, and that's helping as well, as opposed to like a sort of more traditional process where you might like try and screen, like the research thing where you like call them and you're like, oh, tell me about your thing. It's very different, like actually just seeing them try to do it. Which has been really, really cool.
Yeah. I think expert systems demand that you do that lived reality thing in a way that maybe like consumer systems don't. Again, like it feels like I worked everywhere else and I don't reference Shopify examples. But again, back in the day when I was working in investment banking, like the only way to understand how to design a trading system is to sit next to a trader and watch them with like their 17 screens and literally watch them move data and look at things. And like, there'd be something over here that they're just glancing at. And it's kind of there in a very glanceable position, but they're not actually doing anything with it. And some of those little cues you don't pick up on if you're asking someone, so tell me how you set up your work environment. You have to kind of have that observational and constant interaction with folks. I guess, Gavin, maybe share with us, what is the most surprising experience you've had in your career designing developer experiences? Because I believe you were you've been working with developer products for a while, right? Prior to Shopify as well. So has there been anything that's happened that always stands out in your mind as being like, okay, this is a weird job that I have?
I mean, you mentioned a few minutes ago just kind of the shock of going from more kind of like visually oriented design kinds of challenges to this design challenge, which you have to rely on almost like a whole different set of senses to effectively figure out what's going on and to design solutions out of that. I think that, I have been working in developer tools for a little while. Before I worked at Shopify, I worked at Google, and I worked on their cloud platform for a couple of years. And I've worked in design systems and kind of like design platforms for a while before that. And I think that, I guess I would say this, what has been maybe surprising or just like an enduring puzzle to figure out is this idea that when you're talking about, like you said, tools for experts, right? Or what in other jobs we would call like power user tools, right?
Yeah.
You've got this challenge of like, respecting that audience and their desire to go quickly into, a very like powerful environment, but at the same time, bringing in people who may not be as familiar, right?
Yeah.
So kind of going back to what Owen was saying a few minutes ago, we would actually strongly agree that on the application side, we want to get people to hello world as quickly as possible, right? Like we don't want you to have to go through all this sign up and do all this stuff. Now, for us, we are dealing with a situation where people are installing apps eventually on production stores. So at that point in time, we have to safeguard data and make sure that like you can't just be some random person being like, oh yeah. Like I'm just going to take all this personally identifiable information out of somebody's store and then go sell it out there on the black market. But what we want to do is to say, look, if you are a power user and you're familiar with this whole tool set, right? Your 0 to hello world might just be dropping you right into, like a code editor and like letting you play around with things, right? But at the same time, there's a reason why there's this incredible surge lately in low and no code development tool sets, right? Where you're saying, look, like you can build an app with actually not having to write a lot of code. And I think that's helpful for people, especially as they're kind of coming up to speed on a platform. So for that audience, their time to hello world would actually be increased if you just drop them into a code editor. What they need are like sample applications or templates that they can get going with, right? And so I think that's the challenge, is like the truly like expert audience, they don't appreciate the wizards and like the step-by-step stuff, and like here's a sample app that you can go deconstruct, right? For them, it's actually delaying their time to the desired outcome. But for an entirely different set of people who are using the same platform, that's actually like really helpful. And so I think that's the challenge for us, is like we do want to make it easy for people to play, but that means very different things for different people.
Yeah, for different types of users. Because I don't know, it feels like this low no code thing is controversial, right? Because when I go on Twitter and I listen to developers having chats and stuff, they're almost like, oh, the peasants who need these low code solutions, they should just learn to do what real developers do. There's kind of like an us and them dynamic. So like, how are we processing that? Because I can also see the tension, which is like, actually, we want more people to just do more stuff full stop. And so we want to try, I think you said it earlier on, Gavin, we meet people where they are. And maybe that does mean giving them more wizard-like, building blocks for extending their store's feature set and the types of things they do with Shopify, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that, so first of all, making the information architecture simple and clear, that's something that everybody appreciates, no matter what your skill level is, right? So you can't design your way out of a bad, architecture. But from there, I think that, having like a couple of different pathways where we can say, look, like in the case of hydrogen, right, as Owen was saying, you can go and like, you can essentially bootstrap like a test store very quickly with a code editor next to it. I used that yesterday. It was awesome. Like, I love that. But for folks that are like maybe already experienced developing storefronts or themes or whatever, they can, bypass that. They don't, that's not like a required step. Now finessing that and like understanding how to like kind of channel people down the right path can be very tricky, but also interesting. I think that for us, like you were saying, Lola, like we want to recognize that like when people come to us, there might be a variety of skill levels. And I think part of creating a platform that has equitable outcomes for all different kinds of users involves giving folks who are newer like an ability to ramp up. I mean, like I fully understand, myself having been a designer for now 2 decades, the mentality of like, look, like, there's like, powerful tools, and then there are like tools that are like, less powerful, and the kind of the judgment that's implied there. But I think that if we don't interrogate that, if we don't examine that, what that does is it creates kind of like a very exclusive sort of like situation where it's like, well, you're not part of this, like sort of experienced crowd. You don't belong. What we want is for Shopify as a opportunity, as an economic opportunity for people to be welcoming, right? I mean, I know that like that doesn't mean making the tools blunt though. Right. So we want the tools to be sharp and powerful, but for folks that are still kind of like getting up to speed.
I think the Twitter fights are always interesting because it's like very easy to throw a take into the abyss, and like it just starts the quote tweet spiral. I think it's a spectrum. I really think low code is interesting because it empowers people who might not have the tools to like code yet, or like whatever, to like start playing with the fundamentals. There's a reason we offer something called Shopify Flow where you can sort of do this, like you can drag and drop stuff, and if we got the primitives right, like they can graduate. Like I think that's the interesting thing with like all of these low code things is a lot of what I've seen on Twitter is people play with that, they make good money doing it as a freelancer or whatever, and then they like start dabbling with code, and they've seen all of the like the bits in there. And I think for merchants in particular, it's really empowering because like it frees up capital. First of all, like they don't have to go and spend all this money to like integrate with the ERP system or like do something crazy. Like they might be able to just do it themselves, and then they can invest that money somewhere else. And then when they're like bigger or ready or have a more complicated thing, then they can do that, and they have the right things in place. So I do think I wish all this stuff existed when I was doing like merchant things like 7 years ago. Like we had to hire an agency and pay them out the nose to like make two things talk to each other, like Zapier is magic. And so I love it as an entry point. I think some people just want to get something done, but I do think it's like, hey, oh wow, I can actually make these two computers talk.
Yeah.
And then you start looking under the hood a bit more, and you're like, oh, I could code. Like, it's just this weird curl thing, whatever it is.
You know what? And I do think I love the overarching principle here, which is like, we're not building walled gardens, right?
Right.
The idea of like making Shopify work is actually giving it more reach, and that extensibility and accessibility right down to the code layer
Yeah.
is like a core part of the thing that we're putting out in the world, and it always will be.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've got a few minutes left, and I wanted to just go back to the UI layer for a second and talk about how unique the design decisions we took in dev docs and Hydrogen are. Like, they are like little gaming interfaces, memory, trips down memory lane for people who kind of remember, gaming on like a SNES or like an old school Nintendo and stuff like that. So like, walk me through the style choice there to go with something so specific and so like unique in lots of ways when everyone else is sort of doing high gloss photos with a bit of parallax.
Yeah, it's very retro.
It's super retro, yeah.
And as a kid who grew up, playing 8-bit video games, I do appreciate that. It kind of like warms my heart. The first thing to note is that all of the credit for that is to Jasenia Perez Cruz.
It will be on the podcast.
Good. Yeah. She's way more entertaining than I am. So that's good.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Yeah.
I couldn't know.
Episodes. Might even air before this one, actually. I don't even know. There you go. There's a blooper.
Still subscribe.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. It's really to that team's credit. Like they were the ones who came up with that vision and worked so hard on that. In the kind of furious weeks preceding Unite last year, but yeah, the idea there was like, hey, Shopify as a global brand, right, is I think very opinionated, right, and there's some fearlessness that goes into that, and saying, look, like we're not going to play it safe. We're just going to like put something out there. And it might be like a little quirky, and in some cases it might be controversial. I don't think in the sense of dev docs there was any controversy there, but it was just kind of like a very different perspective on this. And so the design team and all the folks working on that, they came up with this idea of like this sense of like this retro video game art style. And what I love about it is that when you go to the dev site and you see like that landing page, there's like this kind of like pixelated town right on the top, but below that there's like all these subterranean layers, like all the things that are
it reminds you of like lemmings on a piece of the game.
Oh my goodness, that's a good
underneath the town are like all these people who are working to make the town thrive and be successful, right? And so like a lot of times you don't see those people. And so what I love about that art is not just the pixelated, kind of aesthetic, but just like the shout out to the people that are kind of like working, at the infrastructure layer, making things happen.
Yeah.
A lot of times those people don't get a lot of visibility. So yeah, there's a few different things about that I really liked when they produced that.
I mean, it was super cool when that came out because everyone was like, whoa, geekness. My mind blew even further because I was like, Hydrogen to me, I think someone commented on a Slack channel that I was in as well. It was like pure Web3 vibes. So like this coming together of like old school gaming ideas with like this ultra modern, the next internet concept, and like
vaporwave.
It just says,
red ass energy.
So tell me about that.
Oh, it's really interesting. I mean, I think what we really wanted was something that stood on its own. Like, I think probably through dev docs, and I might be speaking for you, Gavin here, we learned that like we don't have to. The brand can stand on its own, particularly with developers. I think like we don't have to go and get that like Shopify website and like copy and paste that onto the developer stuff. That nobody's gonna like that. And it was the same for Hydrogen. Like this is a big bet. It's something that we want to stand on its own. How can we go out in the market and make it stand out? And we looked at so many frameworks. We looked at all of them, and they all, if you get them all at a Figma and you look at them, they all have this like sort of blueprinty vibe. Like all of them have like lo-fi icons, like little
Yeah.
mountains or like whatever. And we were like, what if we just go really loud? Uh, and it was really interesting because I think, the marketing team just absolutely slayed it. Like it came through, and I think everyone was just like, wow. And I don't know if you had this, Gavin, but like there was definitely, we got it back and we were like, whoa, this is a lot. And like your reaction might be like, wow, this is like outrageous. I don't know. And the more we sat with it, like having that reaction, we were like, okay, it's probably the right thing. And it was really interesting because we did have all sorts of different feedback where it was like, oh, maybe it's too far. Like maybe we should walk it back. Like it might be a little bit hard. And I think the fact that like the first impression was wow was sort of the right thing that we held on to, and then we sort of like we tweaked it over time. But I think what we wanted to get back to was that nostalgic thing. It's like you look at it and you're like, cool, there's some 90s stuff in here, but it's sort of it's like a remix of like what you see on like other websites, like Stripe is all gradienty, like some of that's in there, but it's sort of a mishmash of all of it, and I think it works really well because you hit it and you're like, oh cool, like this is a developer thing, but it doesn't look like all of the other ones.
No. And I think both sides preserve really well. And it's that under the hood, right? Like we didn't compromise on usability. It's still really intuitive. It works really well across a bunch of devices and platforms. So it's like the best of what you would expect on the web in 2021 combined with like this retro energy that's actually like almost emotional, right? And who does that with like corporate output? It's like the idea that you would build some kind of spirit into something is like the holy grail. I really loved that. We shipped it, damn it. That plus our teenage Twitter handle just like tells people a lot about what Shopify's like.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, the Hydrogen team just basically like dialed it all the way up to like 11 on that one. I think that what's sneaky about stuff like that is that it's not just like, wow, that's like, such a fun design. It actually creates a memorable touch point that I think if we're smart, and we haven't quite done this yet, at least on the build side, is if you carry that sensibility through deep into the experience. So like for us, for instance, that pixel art, it actually makes for fantastic icons, right? So as you're like going through the experience, you've got these little wayfinders, like a light bulb or something like that, or like
signature moments,
like a little Mario question box, right? Like they can become these like sort of tethers to that initial experience, and they can also help guide you through as you're getting like more and more subterranean, right? So I think that for me is one of the goals going forward. Is like, okay, we've establish this like impression right out of the gate. Now, how do we carry that through into the actual more like business end of the experience, right? So that you're reminded that this is fun and that like, you're part of this whole world. That's what great design is like it kind of like reinforces these emotional touch points.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, like if you look at the Hydrogen side, the thing that you might notice compared to what I would say, I don't want to slander the corporate world, but like a lot of corporate stuff that might come out like this is none of this is a lie. Like the code in here is real code from the framework. Like I'm just going through it to really validate this. There's a demo, which is like Toby creating it on his computer. And like that isn't made up. Like this is the actual CLI. Like it's not obfuscated at all. Like we're really putting it all out there, even though it looks all flashy and really cool. Like none of it is fake. It's actual code. We didn't mess around with this.
Authenticity in that, I think. Well, and this is why I feel like the episode, it's like, this is our permission to nerd out. Like we are super interested in all of those layers of experience and functionality. And these sites are just front doors for all of that stuff.
Exactly.
Which I love. Okay. So we're going to wrap up the episode with this bad boy. I mean, the idea was supposed to be that we can pick and choose, but I'm just going to pick a couple of questions here. This is like a quick fire round, one for each of you. Who knows what it's actually going to do. So,
really
Owen, tell us about, if you can, in like 1 minute, one of your biggest failures as a designer.
Oh, man, way to start.
Yeah, it's a juicy one.
Got to give us something juicy.
Oh my God, I'm on the spot. Like, what is the biggest failure? I think actually in the developer space, the biggest one that I have maybe like struggled with, even as a manager, is just like for like there's this instinct in UX to like not show stuff until it's like further along or like looks good enough to explain. But something I'm learning in the developer space is just like air it all out, show your garbage. It will help you a lot. Like I think there's been a few cases where it's like we will like hide or like shelter something that we're working on because the guts aren't really right yet. But when it comes to this developer stuff, that's when we should be showing it because it will stop us going off track a lot later. And it's interesting to get used to it because usually you're like working on these like mental models or like whatever, and you don't want people to give you feedback on this thing because it won't make sense yet. But for this developer stuff, I've really run into a few times where it's like, no, let's just show it. Like it will really help us tease out if we're just basing this on the wrong concept entirely, like maybe the CLI is just a completely wrong thing, whatever it might be. And so just being willing to be like, hey, this is like half broken, but just bear with me. Does it make sense? Sort of thing.
Yeah. It's a super vulnerable thing as well, I think.
It's developers, you know, they're going to be like, no.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
Okay, Gavin, what app, service, or product do you wish, like anywhere in the world, do you wish you had worked on?
Oh, wow. What app, product, or service anywhere in the world? Does it have to be an app?
I mean, just tell us about a thing that inspires you that you wish you'd been part of making it look.
Right. Well, I think that, coming up as a designer, I was really inspired by, the work of, the really like prestige design agencies like Pentagram, for instance, and I studied that work and like bought the monographs of Paula Scher and those, people like that. And I think that even to this day, there's like still a part of me that would be like rather starstruck if like, I was sitting in the same room as some of those people. And I know that has like nothing to do with apps or like products from a internet point of view. But I think the reason why I say that is because I think we all entered this field with a sense of inspiration and a passion for being creative. And I think that means different things for different people. But it's important that, it's a long journey, right? Your career is not a short path.
Marathon, not a sprint. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so connecting back to those things that brought you here to begin with, I think are healthy and good from time to time. So I'll still dust off those books or like, the identity guidelines for, the New York subway system, for instance. Like I still enjoy flipping through that stuff, it delights me.
I love that stuff. And I think it's so important. There's actually a book I came across recently that was beautifully designed. It's like a wine infographic book that had all of that sort of really interesting like texture stuff and color play on the front cover. And then every single visual in the book is stunning. And then you even like take the paper and like the paper that they picked and like all these layers of design. It's like, yeah, that's not the UI. That's not geeky. It's not about building anything, but just like to hold it and feel it and look at it, just like waves of pleasure go through your mind and stuff, I love that stuff. Absolutely love it. Gentlemen, thank you so, so much for kicking off our podcast season with this amazing conversation. I encourage everyone to follow you on Twitter. I will put your Twitter handles and all your social stuff there. I'm pretty sure you're probably hiring. So we'll make sure that people know to connect with you because we're always hiring. But yeah, thank you for this conversation. And thank you to our audience for listening in. Check out more from our team or find out how to join us by visiting ux.shopify.com. Inside Shopify UX is hosted by me, Lola Oyelayo-Pearson.
Produced by Jen Shaw.
Assisted by Isabel Hamel-Karasi.
Edited by Michael Bussa.
With art and graphics by Alicia Giroux.
Danny Chavez-Ackerman.
And Trevor Slovany.
Music by Silent Quiet Spaces.
Tune in next week where we ask the question, did UX kill visual design?